The sound of flashing police sirens broke the quiet evening as Marcus Johnson pulled into the driveway of his own home, a sprawling mansion he had worked his whole life to afford. He had just returned from a business trip, tired but excited to finally relax, only to find police cars blocking his driveway and officers surrounding his property. The reason? His neighbor, a woman known in the community for her constant complaints, had called 911, claiming a suspicious black man was trespassing. Marcus, dressed in a tailored suit and driving a luxury car, suddenly found himself questioned like a criminal outside of the mansion that was his and his alone. The woman who made the call, a resident of the HOA board, had been causing problems for years. But what made the situation even more shocking was what Marcus discovered after the officers finally allowed him to walk into his home. She had been living inside his mansion for the past 2 weeks while he was away. Clothes in the closets, food in the fridge, and even her dog's bed in the corner of the living room. She had moved in as though it were her own. The story that unfolded would leave the neighborhood shaken and the community divided. How could a respected homeowner, a successful black man, be treated like a stranger in his own home, while the real trespasser was the very woman who had accused him? What followed was not just a battle over property, but a fight for dignity, justice, and the truth in a world too quick to believe lies built on prejudice. Marcus Johnson eased his sleek black sedan to the iron gates of his estate just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn he had poured years of sacrifice into affording. He had just flown back from a week-long business trip overseas, exhausted but relieved to finally return to the sanctuary of his home. Yet the scene that greeted him was nothing like the peaceful evening he had imagined. 3 police cars sat in his driveway, their red and blue lights slicing through the night, while uniformed officers lingered near the steps of his mansion. His heart sank, confusion turning quickly into unease as he parked at the curb and stepped out, suitcase still in hand. "Sir, can we help you?" One of the officers barked as though Marcus were an intruder rather than the owner. "This is my house," Marcus replied evenly, though a pulse of anger throbbed at his temple. Before he could produce his ID, the sharp, accusing voice of Karen Miller, his HOA board neighbor and self-appointed guardian of the community, cut through the air. "That's him. That's the man I saw break in earlier. I told you he didn't belong here." She stood on the lawn, arms crossed, her little dog trembling in her arms like some prop in her performance. Marcus blinked in disbelief. He had lived here for years, paid every mortgage bill on time, landscaped his yard perfection, and even donated to the local park renovation, yet here he was being treated like a stranger. The officers approached cautiously, hands near their belts, asking for proof of ownership as though his presence alone were a crime. Trying to remain calm, Marcus pulled out his driver's license and house key, explaining he had been away on business. Still, the humiliation stung, his words hanging in a heavy silence while Karen shook her head, insisting he was lying. After tense minutes that felt like hours, one officer finally relented and allowed him to unlock the front door. The moment the lock clicked open, Marcus felt a surge of relief, until he stepped inside and his stomach tightened with dread. The air smelled faintly of lavender perfume, nothing like the crisp, clean scent he left behind. His artwork had been rearranged. A wine glass rested on the counter, and fresh groceries sat on the kitchen island. He froze, suitcase slipping from his grasp. Someone had been living in his home, and as he moved through the rooms, noticing clothes neatly folded in his dresser and toiletries by the sink, a horrifying truth began to unfold. He wasn't returning to an empty mansion. He was stepping into someone else's claim. And the most chilling realization of all was that the very woman accusing him outside had been the one trespassing all along. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his pulse quickening as his eyes scanned the familiar yet altered surroundings of his mansion. Every detail screamed intrusion, from the scent of perfume to the dog bed tucked neatly in the corner of the living room. His disbelief deepened when he noticed framed family photos of his had been moved aside on the mantel, replaced temporarily with cheap picture frames containing strangers, Karen's relatives. The audacity was staggering. He turned sharply to the officers still waiting outside and called them in, demanding they see the evidence for themselves. At first, their skepticism lingered, their faces tight with doubt. But when one of the officers followed him into master bedroom and found a half-packed suitcase filled with women's clothes, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Marcus's anger grew hotter by the second, boiling beneath his calm exterior. "This isn't just trespassing," he said through clenched teeth. "She's been living here like this was hers." One officer muttered something about securing the scene, and another began making calls over his radio, their tone now tinged with unease. Outside, Karen's shrill voice could still be heard, demanding Marcus be removed from her neighborhood, but her performance faltered when the police confronted her with the evidence. She stammered, cheeks flushing, claiming she thought the house was abandoned and that she had only been watching over for the good of the community. Marcus felt his hands tremble with a mix of fury and insult. This wasn't just about property. It was about dignity. He had worked endlessly to build this life, only to have his presence questioned and his home stolen in his absence. Karen's flimsy excuses unraveled further when security camera footage was pulled from the system Marcus had installed years ago. There she was in grainy color, dragging luggage to the front door days after his departure, walking her dog in his backyard, even hosting what looked like a wine night with a few of her friends. The officers exchanged glances, their earlier suspicion of Marcus now replaced with uncomfortable recognition of the truth. Karen's lies collapsed in real time, yet she refused to admit wrongdoing, repeating that she had acted in the neighborhood's best interest. Marcus's chest tightened, not from fear but from the insult of it all. The humiliation of being treated as a criminal in his own sanctuary, while the real trespasser hid behind her title as HOA board member. Neighbors had gathered outside, whispering, their eyes darting between Marcus and Karen, and he could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a storm cloud. Some of them knew him well, had seen him wave from his driveway or host charity dinners, yet even now their faces carried questions instead of support. That silent doubt cut deeper than words. As the officers prepared to escort Karen away, Marcus stood in his living room, his fists unclenching slowly. He realized then that this wasn't just about reclaiming his house. It was about reclaiming his identity in a neighborhood too ready to erase him. The days that followed were a blur of tension, paperwork, and sleepless nights as Marcus tried to make sense of the invasion of his life and home. Yet the memory of that evening lingered like a scar across his mind, replaying over and over. The flashing lights, the doubt in the officer's eyes, Karen's brazen lies dripping like venom from her mouth while she stood in his yard, clutching a dog that had been sleeping in his house. Now, with Karen officially charged and banned temporarily from the neighborhood, Marcus thought the worst was behind him, but he was wrong. The neighborhood, once a place where he had imagined peace and community, suddenly turned cold, whispers following him every time he stepped outside. Some neighbors crossed the street instead of greeting him. Others offered fake smiles that never reached their eyes, and a few even hinted that perhaps he had overreacted, that maybe Karen's confusion was understandable. Each word was a dagger, not because he believed them, but because he knew it revealed the truth, that many of them had never truly accepted him as one of their own. Late at night, Marcus walked the halls of his mansion, the silence so thick it felt suffocating. He'd pause in the living room where Karen had hosted guests, picturing her laughter echoing off the walls as if she had rewritten his life in her image, and he would feel his chest tighten with rage at the thought of being erased in his own home. Still, he resolved not to be silent. The following week, he arranged a meeting with the HOA board, demanding accountability, demanding answers for how someone in a position of authority could so brazenly abuse her power. He arrived in a crisp suit, shoulders squared, and spoke with calm precision, presenting evidence of Karen's trespassing and the humiliation he had endured. Yet as he looked around the room, he saw faces shifting uncomfortably, some unwilling to meet his gaze, some already forming excuses. "This isn't just about a house," Marcus said, his voice steady but sharp. "This is about a neighbor who weaponized her position, her privilege, and her prejudice to try and destroy me." The silence that followed was thick, almost choking, but Marcus didn't flinch. In that moment, he realized he was no longer just fighting for his property. He was fighting for his dignity, for the right to exist in the place he had worked so hard to belong. Walking back to his mansion that evening, the weight of the stairs pressing against his back, Marcus understood that the battle was only beginning. Karen might have been exposed, but the cracks she revealed in the community, the prejudice, the suspicion, the willingness to doubt him, were far deeper than her single betrayal. And for the first time since that night, Marcus knew he wasn't just reclaiming a house. He was reclaiming his story, one that no lie, no accusation, no whisper could take from him again. Marcus awoke the following week to find his story had spread beyond the gates of his neighborhood, carried first by whispers and then by headlines that cast a shocking ordeal into the public eye. And suddenly what had begun as a personal violation turned into a battle that strangers everywhere seemed to have an opinion on. News stations replayed the security footage of Karen dragging her luggage across his marble floors. Social media erupted with hashtags defending him, and messages of support flooded his inbox from people who saw in his story the reflection of a larger truth: how easily a man, even one of means and success, could be treated like an outsider in his own home simply because of the color of his skin. Marcus read the comments late at night, some filled with encouragement, others with venom. And though he tried to focus on the positive, the cruel words cut deeply. Accusations that he had exaggerated, claims that Karen was just confused, and the ever-present whispers that he didn't really belong in that mansion. He had spent years building a business from the ground up, nights of sacrifice and days of endless work. Yet still people questioned his right to stand where he stood. Fueled by a determination not to let the narrative be twisted, Marcus agreed to an interview, sitting calmly before the cameras in his living room, the very place where Karen had once played house, and telling his truth without anger but with unshakable conviction. "This isn't just about me," he said, voice steady. "It's about what happens when someone is judged before they're even given a chance to explain. I was treated like a trespasser in my own home, while the real trespasser was protected by people's assumptions." His words struck a chord, sparking heated debates across dinner tables and city council meetings alike. And though the attention brought scrutiny, it also brought allies. Civil rights groups reached out, offering legal support and amplifying his voice, while a handful of his neighbors, those who had quietly watched from behind their curtains, finally stepped forward to apologize, admitting that they had been wrong to doubt him. Yet Marcus knew apologies did not erase the sting of that night, nor did headlines ease the memory of the flashing sirens outside his door. The weight of what happened still lingered in every corner of the house, in every creak of the floorboards where Karen's footsteps had once echoed, and some nights he lay awake wondering if he would ever truly feel safe there again. But as he stood on his balcony overlooking the city, the cool night air brushing against his face, Marcus made a vow to himself. He would not allow this ordeal to define him as a victim. He would use it as fuel, as proof of his resilience, and as a story that no prejudice, no lie, and no invasion could silence. Weeks passed, and though the media frenzy began to fade, the echoes of what happened lingered in the neighborhood like an unsettled storm. Every glance, every whisper reminding Marcus that trust could not be rebuilt overnight, but instead of retreating into silence, he chose to move forward with purpose, determined that the ordeal would not break him, but shape him into something stronger. Karen had been formally charged with trespassing and fraud, stripped of her HOA position, and forced to face the very system she had once wielded like a weapon. Yet Marcus found little satisfaction in her downfall, because the truth was, no punishment could erase the humiliation he had endured that night when police officers doubted his right to stand in his own driveway. What did bring him peace was the way he began to reclaim his home, step by step, restoring every room Karen had touched, hanging his art back on the walls, replacing the center of perfume with fresh flowers, and filling the halls with the music he loved. Slowly, the mansion felt like his sanctuary again, not haunted but reborn, a reminder that no one could rewrite his story but him. The neighborhood, too, began to shift in small but significant ways. Some residents who had once turned away now approached him with genuine kindness, offering to stand with him at community meetings, while others still avoided him, unwilling to confront their own biases. Marcus accepted both reactions with the same calm strength, knowing that change was never immediate, but always possible. One evening, standing on his balcony with the city lights glittering below, he thought about the path he had walked, from the shame of being treated like an intruder to the triumph of standing firm in his truth, and he realized that his fight had never been just about protecting bricks and mortar. It was about protecting his dignity, his identity, and the right of anyone to feel safe in a home they built with their own hands. Looking out across the horizon, he allowed himself a small smile, not because the world was suddenly free of prejudice, but because he had proven to himself that no matter how heavy the lies or how sharp the accusations, He could not be broken. The mansion stood tall behind him, his fortress not just a stone but a spirit. And as the cool night air wrapped around him, Marcus whispered himself words that felt like both closure and beginning. This is my home. This is my story. And no one will ever take it from me again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe to The Black Struggle on YouTube for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard.